So breathing. Pretty whack, right? So we all learn about that thing that resets your 5-minute living timer every time you do it, but how does it actually work? Well, I'm gonna show you. Before your body can get that sweet, sweet number 8 on the periodic table 6 valence electron having life gas, it needs to get to your body first. First! Your intercostal muscles contract and they move your ribs upward as your lungs expand. At the same time, your diaphragm, which is a big muscle flattened underneath the lungs, flattens and moves down and creates this wacky thing called negative pressure. Now, negative pressure works in the opposite way of positive pressure. Yeah, no Sherlock. Negative pressure works and helps the lungs by creating a vacuum. This vacuum is what actually draws the air into the passageways of the mouth and nose, which do a lot more than act as simple passageways. This brings me to... Second! The mouth and nose not only carry that sweet life gas to your lungs, they also have this crazy stuff that you may have heard of called mucus. Now, mucus is cool because it does two very important things. The first is that it helps trap and destroy pathogens and bacteria, helping to keep your body safe from infection. The second is that it also helps warm and moisten the air before it gets to the lungs, which makes it easier for the lungs to work with. I know that sounds weird to some of you saying that the air needs to be moist, but it helps. So in your throat, there are 3 sections that aren't really physical but are divided up, being the nasopharynx, oropharynx, and laryngopharynx. Now, the more I say pharynx, the more I'm realizing it sounds like I'm beckoning the name of an eldritch horror. So air will only pass through the nasopharynx and the oropharynx. It, however, doesn't go through the laryngopharynx, as only food travels through that section of the throat. Well, that and whatever you upchuck as a result of hearing your voice recorded for a YouTube video for the first time. The next step for the air is called the epiglottis, which is this weird little leaf-like thingamabob that keeps you from choking every time you swallow something. See, when you swallow, it triggers a reaction in your throat, which causes the epiglottis to close over your windpipe, because whenever you drink or eat something and start choking, it went through the windpipe and not your esophagus, where it should be going. This is actually where the expression, "it went down the wrong pipe," comes from. So the next stop on our oxygen destination is the trachea. So unlike the esophagus, the trachea is much more stiff instead of being flappy. It's like this because it would kind of suck for you if every single time you tried to breathe in or out, you started becoming a shade of oxygen-deprived blue. It's able to stay like this because of several C-shaped pieces of cartilage outside of the trachea. Even cooler, if you look inside of the trachea, you'll see a bunch of what we in the scientific community call a ton of little hairs called cilia. The cilia is usually found on small single-celled organisms or small multi-celled organisms that use these little hair-like appendages to get around. In the trachea, however, these cilia serve a purpose as to remove debris, dust, food, and mucus from the windpipe, slowly pushing it up so it can be spit out or swallowed. Finally, we're at the lungs, the main attraction of this shabacle. So the lungs aren't just 2 hollow sacs, because that'd be too easy and evolution hates medical students. Instead, the lungs are a complex ductwork with little air sacs at the end, which do the actual oxygen diffusion. To make this process easier, the outside of the lungs is coated with a slippery paste called pleural fluid, which allows the lungs to easily glide across the thoracic wall and other muscles underneath your ribs. My theory is that evolution decided to do this because I'm guessing people would have gotten tired of having to hear what sounds like a balloon being grated across a chalkboard every time you took a breath. So your lungs start with 2 large bronchial tubes, one in each lung. The one on the right is actually straighter and wider than the one on the left. In fact, your entire right lung is bigger than the one on the left. This is because the left lung has 2 lobes, while the right lung has 3, as the left one has to be smaller in order to make room for the heart. You know, that lubby-dubby thingamabob that kind of pumps the life juices around. The further each bronchial tube gets, the more branchier it gets. We get to a point where the bronchial tubes become bronchioles. If bronchial tubes are like branches or larger tree limbs, bronchioles are like twigs. Remember it like this. Larger name, larger tube. At the end of each bronchiole is an alveoli, or an air sac. This is where the exchange of oxygen to blood and carbon dioxide back to the lungs to be breathed out actually takes place. Now, the reason the lungs are set up like this is because it increases surface area. The more surface area you have, the more oxygen diffusion can take place. Now, the oxygen in the alveoli are connected to what's called the respiratory membrane. In the respiratory membrane is where the diffusion happens. Now, diffusion is cool for one really big reason. It doesn't take any energy to do. For those of you who don't know, diffusion is the movement of particles in a large concentration to an area with particles in a small concentration. In order to keep the air you breathe nice and clean, little cells called alveolar macrophages exist. These specialized white blood cells exist purely to keep debris, dust, and pathogens out of your system. It's like an alveolar specialized hitman unit. Now for the final destination. The blood, or more specifically, the red blood cells, and even more specifically, the hemoglobin. Also real quick, just in case you don't know the difference between arteries and veins, arteries pump oxygen-rich blood from the lungs to the heart, where it's pumped throughout the body. Meanwhile, veins, on the other hand, carry oxygen-deprived blood to the lungs to be re-enriched with oxygen. Now back to the hemoglobin. So, oxygen can't attach directly to the blood cell itself. It attaches to this protein called hemoglobin, which kinda looks like if a can of silly string had a one-night stand with an earthworm. So each protein of hemoglobin can carry exactly 4 molecules of oxygen, or 4 molecules of carbon dioxide. The hemoglobin will unbind the oxygen whenever it reaches the cells it needs to, and then bind with carbon dioxide. This carbon dioxide is then carried back to the lungs to be exhaled. One final note, there is a very big difference between carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide. The first you exhale and it puts you out of breath. The second engines exhale and it puts you out of the census. Anyways, the oxygen-deprived blood gets back to the alveoli, and the entire process is reversed. Your ribs lower, your intercostal muscles relax, your diaphragm folds back into the curved position it usually is, and the air is finally pushed out of the lungs, windpipe, and mouth with positive pressure. Now, even with everything you've just learned, this is still a pretty surface-level understanding of the respiratory system. This system can get even more complex, and it's just one of many body systems. I hope you enjoyed this video and actually learned something, and I hope you remember it till your last breath. Wait, no, that sounded wrong. Wait.